It's Winter Stitch Sampler Knit Along time. It's week 1 and we're going to be knitting the butterfly stitch this week. Before we get into it, my name's Holly. This is my channel at Yarns Link, and here we celebrate knitting, crochet, traveling, crafting, whatever piques my interest. And if you'd like to learn more about these topics, come along on my adventures, or just get notifications each week when the Stitch Sampler Knit Along pattern is published, please consider subscribing. All right, let's get to it. The week 1 stitch, the butterfly stitch, is a fun all over pattern that looks a little bit like a spider to me. I didn't actually name it, so I didn't get to pick butterfly stitch, but I appreciate the attempt to make it a little bit more beautiful by giving it a gentler name. These are the little butterflies, as you can see, all over the pattern. It's worked on a panel of stockinette. So of course you're going to get some curling around the edges, and this piece has not yet been blocked. You can find the written instructions for this stitch on the website, which is linked below. And I also provided instructions there for the stitch as a standalone pattern, so if you want to adapt it or incorporate it to other projects, you can do that. But let's get started. So for this particular project, I'm going to be working a swatch for the video. You can swatch along with me, or you can start working the panel straight away. That's up to you. It'll give you a good idea of your gauge and stockinette for the project if you just go ahead and get started. Your first step is to cast on. If you are working the swatch, you're going to cast on 16 stitches. If you're working the panel directly, cast on 66 stitches. 66 is going to be our standard for every panel that we work. I think every panel. I could be wrong. There might be a couple that are 67, so don't quote me on that. Okay, so like I said, 16 if you're doing the swatch, which is what I'm doing. 66 if you're doing the panel itself. And I've already cast mine on. The setup row for this particular stitch is worked first, and it's all knit. I already worked that too. So pause this video, take a minute, knit your first row, which is the setup row, and we'll get started together. Okay, if you have already knit that setup row, we're going to get started with row 1, which actually begins on the wrong side. Ooh, pardon the noise. I am using circular needles. I did recommend these in the introductory video for the Winter Stitch Sampler Knit Along, because some of the stitches that we'll be working, they do actually get quite long as the stitch multiples grow. So you will need room for more than those 66 stitches. If you're using straights, now is the time to consider getting some longer needles that can accommodate about 200 stitches will be fine. So row 1, this dives directly into the stitch pattern. So we're going to start with a purl 3. You can slip the first stitch if you want to, because you are going to be joining these pieces. But for the purposes of this project, I'm going to go ahead and just work them. Try to work them nice and slow so you can keep up. These are our 3 setup edge stitches. So it's always going to be a purl 3, repeating the stitches in the middle, and end with a purl 3 for this pattern. Okay. Within what we would consider to be our stitch area, purl 5. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then with our yarn and back, we're going to slip 5 purlwise. 2, 3, 4, 5. And then we're going to purl 3. So you really want to be careful here. This is creating a long straight bar across the front of your work that we're going to pick up later. It'll become the butterflies. So you don't want to pull this too tightly, or it's going to cinch up these areas. So try to keep it loose and work it as if that stitch had been purled as well or knit as well. So purl 3, boom, that's row 1. So just make sure you're keeping your tension even. Loose is better than tight when it comes to these particular bars, because you are going to snatch them up and it's really going to adjust any looseness that you have. But if it's too tight, you'll have puckering. All right, row 2 and most of the right side rows for this pattern, you're going to knit straight across. Again, you can slip that first stitch if you want. And of course, your knitting doesn't have to look like this. It should look like the way that you knit that's comfortable for you. I often find when they do these videos, I am knitting in a very stiff fashion. So I'm trying to make sure everyone can follow along, and it's a little awkward and clunky. But there you go. That's what it'll look like after you finish row 2, and you've just got this long bar here. If you're working the actual panel, you'll have lots of bars. Okay, so row 3, just like row 1, we don't even have to look at the pattern for this one. What's nice about it is we can already see where that panel is. Oh, not panel, that bar is, right? So we know we're going to keep going all the way down to here. So we just follow along. And it's a knit or a purl 5, excuse me. And oh, are we there yet? Yep, we're there. So we're going to put our yarn in the front. We're going to slip 5 purlwise. You can see how this would work up really quickly. You're not even knitting these stitches. And then bring this guy back. Oops. Oh no, I did one extra. There you go. So 5 and then purl 3. And that's why I always check on that stitch count. Hopefully that didn't get too off screen for you, because I did pull it a little closer to be sure. So now we have 2 of these little bars going across. And of course, we're going to do this one more time. So knit across. And one thing is, if you realize that you haven't slipped knitwise or purlwise, you can always, move the stitches back in the direction they need to be by turning them on your needle, like that. Sometimes I would, get in a hurry when I was working this and realize when I went to purl them, they were kind of facing the wrong way. It doesn't really matter, because you can just reorient them on the next row. Okay, so that's row 4. So we have our 2 bars. Row 5, believe it or not, just like 1 and 3. So I'm going to purl my 3. And remember, those are the 3 for my edge, and then the pattern starts with purl 5. I'm just going to double check I'm in the right spot. I am. Move my yarn back. Slip all my stitches, and this is what I mean. If you accidentally turn one that way, you can always fix it on the way back. So I've got 5 and 3. I just want to double check my numbers. I'm in the right spot, and purl the last 3. Okay, so that's row 5. So now we have these 3 little bars on a background of stockinette stitch. Row 6 is what's actually going to create our butterflies, our first set of butterflies, and you can see there is a little bit of a pull right there. That'll even out with blocking, so that's not too bad. Okay, so for row 6, we're going to knit 3, and I did slip the first one. Again, that's just personal preference. And then the pattern begins. We're going to knit 2, and then you're going to insert the needle under the 3 slipped strands, these 3, and then we're going to knit into this stitch. Okay, and then we pull it under like that, and that's what actually creates the little butterfly. All right, I'm going to back up and do that again just so you guys can see it. Whoop. Oh, I've lost this stitch. Okay. So of my 5 stitches, I'm always going to make the butterfly in the middle one, because we are going to repeat this several times here and here and here all the way down. So this center one is where I'm always going to pick up. You're just going under them, knitting 1 stitch, and throwing them back behind the stitch. And then you finish knitting the rest of the row. If you are working the actual panel and not the swatch, then you'll knit 7, and that'll bring you to your next butterfly. And when you get to the end, you'll knit 3. So it's kind of a weird method, but you're just knitting behind these 3 stitches and kind of throwing it behind them when you're done. So I always double check and make sure they're lined up in the center of the bar. Once you get a few on there, it becomes really obvious if they're lined up all the way up the panel, kind of like these, or if they're a little off center. And then you don't really have to worry about counting if you can just kind of gauge it, you know, eyeball it. Okay. So the next 6 rows are simple. They're just stockinette stitch. I'm actually gonna knit those because they get a little boring for you guys to watch, but that's what's creating this space right here. So these are the next 6 rows that you're gonna knit, so just go ahead and knit those. Come back when you're done and we'll work on the second repeat of butterflies. Okay, you've done rows 7 to 12. Now we're on row 13. And just like we did before, we're going to purl 3. These are those edge stitches that we start with and end with. So purl 3, and then because we made our butterfly down here the first time, we're going to start with a butterfly this time. So we move our yarn to the front. We slip all our stitches. All right, so we slip all 5. Bring the yarn back and continue working our purl stitches. Purl 5, and we'll continue with the slipping 5, purling 5 for the panel, but for the swatch we're done after 5 and end with our purl 3. So this sets up your butterfly wings off center from the last ones. So because I didn't work this gap, what we're having is these 2 are right next to each other, as you can see. So it'll work out like that. Okay. The next row is knit. If you are just joining us for the Winter Stitch Sampler Knit Along, this yarn that I'm using is Lion brand yarn. It's Pound of Love. I used 2.5 of them, which was 2.5 pounds of yarn. Which is about 2,500 yards to do the whole project. And this color is called Antique White. So it is not quite a bright white or a true white. It is an off-white. I think it goes with everything, which is why I picked it. I also think it shows the stitch definition really well. So it's really nice when you're using samplers to be able to see the differences in the stitches from panel to panel. Okay, so that's 14. Row 15 is just like row 7, just like row 13. So we're gonna do our, oops, you can slip that if you want to. The first stitch you can always slip. It makes a tidier edge. And then we're gonna put those stitches, just slip them right on over. That's 5, right? Double check, like this. So because this is stockinette, which everybody's familiar with, and slipping stitches, it actually works up really quickly. I think it's a good first week stitch pattern. All right. We have our second little butterfly taking flight right there. All right, next row. Knit them all. I think my camera's doing some weird stuff. Trying to refocus. Okay, and then we're going to have one more row of setting up these bars. And shoot. And I'm slipping, and I'm moving my 5 stitches, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And again, watch your tension on those so you don't get too tight. You can always just look after. Sometimes I pinch if I'm working with something like that for tension. I'll pinch it so that it can't go anywhere when I work the next stitch. It's a little ham-fisted, but it works. Lost a stitch. Okay. This is it. This is the stitch or the row that creates the second set of butterflies. It's row 18. So what we're going to do is we're going to knit on down until we get to the center here. Remember I said we always use the center of the 5, and that's the one we're going to pick up around. So I will slip that one and just knit on down. And I'll go nice and slow once I get to the butterfly part. All right, almost there. So we have 5 stitches here. 1, 2, and this is number 3. Okay, so I'm going to go under, knit, and bring those over. All right, one more time. This is what it looks like when I got to it. Nice and close. I am going to go under, knit normally into this stitch, and then bring all 3 of those over and continue knitting. If I can get my yarn around that needle. Okay, so that's what it looks like. That's your 2 different butterflies. They're set off from one another. Rows 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, the last 6 rows, those are just stockinette again. So you can go ahead and work those, and that's what's going to create the next gap. And you just work these 24 rows over and over. You're going to work them 4 times if you're working the panel, and then there will be 97 rows total, and that's when you'll bind off. So work the 24 rows for this pattern 4 times. If you're working the swatch, you can go ahead and bind off. You're done. You can use this as a measurement or give you an idea of size, or just to practice the stitch a little bit more to get comfortable before you get started on the panel. Once you finish the panel, if that's what you're working on, go ahead and bind off your stitches and then weave in your ends. I wouldn't block them yet, just because you want to get a few panels going before you see where you really need to be blocking them and what you need to be trying to achieve with that. If this should be a little loosely blocked, or if we need to really stretch this guy out, which we probably won't. You can use the panel either way if the throw is assembled. If you think the butterflies look better this way, which I kind of do, you know, you can add them to your project that way. I always thought it was interesting that this was considered the butterfly because the wings are kind of pointed down, but it's really up to you. If you'd like the written pattern, it is linked below, so you don't have to follow along, and that does include the written pattern for the Winter Stitch Sampler, as well as the written pattern that is unmodified, so that you can use it in any project you wish. That's it for me today. Thanks for joining me. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did like it, please give me a thumbs up. It really does help. And you can consider subscribing if you'd like notifications of future Stitch Sampler knit-alongs. I hope to see you next week for part 2.